Greetings and welcome to this special feature episode of Meet the Business. My name is James, I'm the apprentice here at Scayl, and today I've been gifted with the opportunity to interview a gentleman that's got over 20 years experience in the tea industry. And not only that, he is also globally renowned for being a thought leader. Will Battle. Will, thank you for joining me. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks, James. Nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me on.
It's all right. Thanks for taking me up on the opportunity. So, we'll crack right in if that's all right with yourself. So your career you started at university and then you progressed onwards to working at your family farm, and then from there you got a job as a trainee tea taster at Tetley's. You've referred to it before as your kind of genesis into the tea trade. Would you say that experience at Tetley's sparked the idea to begin your career?
Well, it was the beginning of my career, I suppose, by definition. But it was they were the only people to offer me a job, and that in itself, was a fortunate position to be in.
Yeah.
And tea's one of those industries where the more you get to know about it, the more you realise how big a field it is and how much there is to learn. So the moment I had sort of jumped into tea, I was pretty hooked, and there was no going back for me really, because I think it's quite a seductive job to work in, with the massive sort of breadth of things that you can dive into to learn more about.
Yeah, it is such a wide world. I think that in some research that I did a while ago, I think the tea industry, I believe in the UK, was valued at about 154 million, I think. So fingers crossed, that's definitely an industry that you can continue to dominate.
Well, James, before you go any further, I definitely do not dominate the tea industry. I am this little minnow at the bottom. And there are some great companies that do dominate the industry. And I think your value must be a bit outdated, because I think it's worth substantially more than that.
Oh, is it?
It's a really valuable industry for the nation. Yeah.
So obviously, with your experience there at Tetley, and you progressed on there to start your company, was it that you saw an opening in the market where you could potentially find an area to beat your competitors?
I think actually it's not really about my competitors. I firstly, I was in the industry for a good 20 years really before I set up my own business, and I think the industry is big enough for me and my competitors, who are all very, very good businesses, to coexist. I just felt that tea's having a moment now, particularly high quality tea.
Yeah.
And people are waking up to the variety, like they did perhaps with coffee 15 years ago. And it's a good time to be involved in supplying high quality teas. And that for me was slightly opportunistic, but I suppose more was the fact that it's an area I just wanted to do. As much as it was about my own ambition for myself and my development, to try and run my own business.
Definitely. So you mentioned there obviously about high quality teas. Would you say that is the USP for your company, and that's how you fight to kind of stand out against your competitors?
Again, I'd say my competitors all offer high quality teas as well. But perhaps for us, we are quite lean and small, and that should make us quicker to respond. We don't have an enormous staff, so the overhead is relatively low, and we're based in the UK. So particularly given Brexit and the impact that's had on speed of movement, and a lot of businesses that are analogous to mine, normally much bigger, based in Germany. And for us being located in the UK, that's an advantage.
Definitely, I must completely agree with you on that. So if you consider that then, let's say in a modern day market with the kind of building up of a company, would you say that it's more beneficial to have a physical presence like a coffee shop, or a digital presence more being your website first?
I am try and be many things, but an expert on retail isn't one of them. I do think that, anybody you speak to in establishing businesses will tell you cash is really important.
Yes.
And obviously having a virtual presence helps in that respect. But there's sometimes just having bricks and mortar in some locations is really important. But I think it's very location dependent. And it does really, it's interesting to see people's experiences. If I were to set up a tea shop, I would be very careful about location. So there's some really, really good, long, well-established tea businesses that have been around for such a long time. And they're the people we speak to about how it is they've managed to flourish for so long, really.
Yeah, definitely. I do completely agree with you there about, obviously, if you were to maintain that kind of physical presence, that location is one of the most important factors to consider when you are progressing forward like that. When it comes to your products though, there's obviously quite a variety of different types in terms of the kind of manufacture of tea itself, with your rolling and your drying of the leaves. Do you have any preference per se as to one you would recommend to be the best?
Saying which is the best is a bit like saying Champagne, fine Bordeaux, Port, Chablis, one's better than the other. I don't think you can say that.
Yeah.
But there's a moment for all of them. And if I were sort of basking outside on a hot sunny day, for me, I quite like an iced tea. But if you were to brew the sort of teas that you use in an iced tea and try and drink them as a hot tea with milk, it just wouldn't. They're not very nice. And yet on a cold, stormy night, hot, milky, thick cup of Assam predominant blended English breakfast type tea is perfect. In the office, I tend to drink a spring crop Darjeeling, and when I'm traveling, I'll drink whatever is put in front of me. But I couldn't say one's better than the other. But I think there's a sort of moment for lots of teas. And for example, I often find people who say they don't like tea because they find it too astringent. For me, I'd always say try a really lightly oxidized oolong, because that slightly lily sweet pea aroma is quite accessible. And that person, oolong might suit that person, but that is at the other end of the flavor spectrum from something thick and full-bodied and malty, or something slightly earthy like a choux pu'er. But all of them have their moments, and I struggle to pick one over any of the others.
Yeah, it can be quite challenging sometimes, can't it?
I mean, it is really challenging, but that's the good thing about tea. That's what makes it quite an exciting industry, because let's use coffee as an example. In coffee, you have generally one, sometimes there's what we call a fly crop harvest, but generally one harvest a year, when all of your cherries are harvested and then processed. So you've got one big batch of coffee. And then you can roast it and grind it sort of how you want. But with tea, you've got potentially, if it's grown on the equator, 300 mini harvests. Each of them might be slightly different from the other. So lots and lots of tiny batches of tea. And then you can make it as a black tea or as a green tea. And if you've got a green tea, you can have it steamed or pan-fired, or an oolong, or a yellow tea, or a dark tea. And that just, the enormous proliferation of different styles that you can get mean that there probably is a tea for everybody, but it also is quite difficult to run a tea business, because very quickly you can have a whole wall full of teas and you've only just scratched the surface.
That's fantastic. So you obviously mentioned there about your kind of customer base, and you mentioned previously that you're a wholesaler. How do you say then that you would go about finding your customers or your clientele with being predominantly a wholesaler business?
Yeah, and for me, I think meeting people's really important. And before COVID, I used to try and travel a lot to meet would-be customers, because I think tea is quite a social industry, and getting to know and trust your suppliers and your customers is quite important. So for me, it was sort of hard miles on the motorway, and that particularly wholesale, where you don't necessarily seek out 100,000 customers. You might want 30 customers that you really can get very close to and work really well together with. So I felt like personal visits was quite important for us.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You obviously mentioned there about the kind of effect that COVID-19 has had on your company. Would you say that, looking back on your kind of career with the company as a whole, is there any of issues that you've faced that have had quite a significant effect on your company or yourself, and how have you gone about overcoming them?
COVID specific, did you say, Jeff?
Well, just on the basis of COVID, really, and using that kind of an example point for it.
Yeah, I think, well, COVID had a big impact on container movements because particularly freight traffic westbound out of China was affected badly. And it still continues to have an impact on the amount of shipping and container availability. Now currently getting vessels out of China is a problem. And that's all really down to COVID and the hangover from the disruption of schedules from last year. That's a big problem for supply. It's also raised freight rates. So the teas, although they may cost the same, as we would say, ex-factory in China, by the time you've got them onto the boat and shipped it over to Europe, the cost is a fair bit higher because of the increased freight rate. Been one big impact. I think also people staying at home more has probably meant more tea bags have been drunk and less, proportionately a bit less loose leaf or larger leaf. So although the overall consumption's gone up because of COVID, because people are at home, they do tend to drink a little bit more tea.
Yes, that's quite interesting, really, Will. Obviously, you mentioned there about how the issues that affect your company is predominantly product dependent, and with there being such a variety of tea, it's really interesting for you to kind of dive into the relationship that specific products of tea may have on your company. You obviously compared that there to the coffee industry and how they might not kind of face that issue. So if we move on then in regards to the kind of building of your company and taking it back now and looking at it as the process as a whole, would you give any kind of advice in regards to someone that would want to build a tea company that's relatively similar and adapted to nowadays, as most people are doing? Do you think that there's any specific features that people should look for, or anything like that, or is there any certifications that you would recommend companies go for?
Well, wholesale's interesting because we are supplying a large sort of market, a significant amount of tea, and cash is important because you've got to hold stocks and have a large amount of available stock to supply your clients. So, I mean, in our case, it was saving up for a long time before we set up the business and investing in stock, not going on holiday, not doing all those fun things that is nice to do in your 30s and 40s. So saving and doing that really was important, because I think it's, if you're not careful, you can have a enormous amount of money tied up in stock. And running wholesale business, it's important to optimize the stock. I think if you're setting up a consumer-facing business, then remembering that not all of your customers will want to drink the sort of teas that you like to drink is a good start point, and understanding where the market is. Sometimes it's easy to have a range of again, similar to what I was saying earlier, sometimes it's easy to have an enormous range of teas, and whereas in fact it might be worth having 6 really, really good ones that you know are going to turn over really fast because they just have great resonance with the customer base. So I think getting the range right is quite important. And when it comes to certifications, it's not one I'm so familiar with because, again, marketing's not my forte. But obviously, Organic and Rainforest Alliance certifications are amongst the more popular ones, and those are both each have their merits. I think sometimes though, just fair trade, of course, as well, but don't, I say, make product quality of paramount importance. The quality of the product is absolutely vital, and also what it looks like isn't necessarily the be all and end all. By that I mean, sometimes people want to have a really sexy, large, whole leaf tea. And sometimes the teas which are most attractive on the leaf aren't necessarily always what the customer wants to drink. Because over here, we're used to drinking tea with milk. And the vast proportion of consumers still do. That's good and bad. It's good because that's what we've always done, and it's brought with it a large amount of kilos per head tea drinking. But what it can do is limit your ability to get on with a wide field of tea. And I'd point you towards a podcast I did together with Sharon Hall from the UK Tea and Herbal Infusions Association on English breakfast tea, called Around the World in 80 Teas. And on that, the wine expert, Andrew Jefford, talks about how not drinking tea with milk has restricted our ability to experiment and try and enjoy a really wide variety of teas. Obviously, if you're drinking a green tea, you wouldn't have it with milk. There's a lot of black teas that work really well without milk. I'm drinking one at the moment, a second flush Darjeeling. And I think probably experimenting as well, and remembering to try and guide your consumer base as someone who is establishing their own tea company, to try and guide the consumer base to a few well-chosen products, but perhaps helping to educate and help consumers along the way with how to drink their tea without being sort of too prescriptive. That's quite a difficult line to tread, but it's one that, if done well, can be quite rewarding, because it does open up some lovely teas to new consumers.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you for that, Will. You obviously mentioned there about how there's such a wide range, and when it comes to creating a company, predominantly the experience that you want to put forward is kind of steering the customer there in terms of the tastes and stuff like that. So there's a farm in Angus that's up in Scotland, and I think that they've been doing some stuff in regards to kind of adapting production methods so that you can grow tea, obviously, in the Scottish climate up there. Would you say that that's an example really for the kind of progression in terms of our knowledge and our behaviour with tea? Do you think that it's something that will continue to develop and evolve as time goes on?
Yeah, I think we never stop learning with tea, and it's such a versatile product that it does continually open up new opportunities to people. And it's lovely what they've done in Scotland. I think an example of innovation in tea would be the innovation in breeding of new cultivars, and there's one in Kenya called purple tea. And purple tea is difficult to make well, but when made well and brewed in the right way, can give you a really unique, interesting, anthocyanin-rich cuppa. That's, if you go to Kenya now, you'll see quite a lot of purple tea in the ground. That's an example of innovation in the field. And then right at the other end, the sort of interplay between tea and craft beer brings us kombucha. And I think that's another example of where, kombucha has been around for a long time. It's not a new thing, but there's been a real growth and resurgence in kombucha companies at the moment, who are putting it in front of consumers who are interested in sort of the no or low alcohol drinks. And that's another example of tea really at the cutting edge of consumer behavior. So 2 examples there of tea sort of developing and evolving in very different ways. And I think it's going to have to continue to evolve because climate change is going to have an impact on the areas of the world that are suitable for growing tea. So we're going to have to continue to evolve and adapt. And that's just a challenge for tea, but it's a challenge of lots of industries.
Definitely, no, I do completely agree with you there. So just in terms of the last question that I've got for you now, Will, obviously with yourself being a globally renowned kind of industry leader, do you think that you will ever come to a point where you'll want to stop that adventure for knowledge and development?
I'll proceed it by saying there are lots of globally renowned industry leaders, and I'm one of the smaller ones. There's lots and lots of people with much more experience than me in the tea industry. But I think I don't anticipate stopping. That you never stop learning, really. And one of the things I always realise when I talk to people who've been around for a lot longer, and I know people who've been in the industry since the 1950s, is that they kept learning until they retired. And there is so much change; it's pretty constant. So I don't feel that you never really get bored. And also the people dimension in tea is really important. And that is something that also sort of holds my attention, holds lots of people's attention, is then getting to know customers and getting to know suppliers really well and making sure who you can trust and do business with. I think that makes it interesting in its own way as well. It's not a although COVID has obviously made us have more remote interactions, it's really not it's not an exchange-based commodity at the moment. It's something that requires discussion and negotiation, and that makes it interesting.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Will, for doing this interview with me today. I really appreciate the opportunity to discuss these topics with you. And thank you guys for tuning in. It's been a whirlwind of adventure and knowledge, and I hope you've learned as much as I have. So my name is James. I'd like to thank Will again for participating. Thank you, Will. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks very much indeed.
And don't forget to like and subscribe, and also hit that notifications bell so you can stay up to date with all new topics that we will be posting. Fantastic. Thank you guys. Bye.